Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. My name's David Pipe, and I'm a Policy and Practice Officer here at the Chartered Institute of Housing. Thanks very much for joining us for this webinar on universal credit. I've got two speakers with me, so my colleague Sam Lister and Gwyn Gascoigne, who is Head of Income at East Midlands Homes. So first of all, just a very little bit of housekeeping from me. If I can move the slides on, there we go. Oh, too far. There we go. Right, so first of all, as I said, a little bit of housekeeping from me. I'm going to explain how the webinar technology works for those of you who might be joining us for the first time, and then we'll launch into a couple of presentations. We'll have bit of time at the end for question and answer, and we'd very much like this to be a participative webinar, so please do make sure that you ask your questions to Gwen and Sam, and I'll tell you how to do that in just a second. We've allowed an hour for the webinar in total, so loosely that's about 20 minutes of hearing from Sam, about 20 minutes of hearing from Gwen, and then about 20 minutes of questions. We'll be recording the webinar, so we'll make this recording available to CH members on the website afterwards. So if you've got colleagues who would benefit, or you want to look back at anything that's been discussed later, you'll be able to do that. So, So first of all, I'm just going to pause here for one moment to make absolutely sure that everyone can hear me okay. So my colleague Chris will get in touch with anyone who can't. And that looks like everyone is okay, so I'm going to move on. So on the right hand side of your screen, you'll see you've got this icon here that sort of looks like a raised hand. You can use that when we come to the question and answer section of the webinar if you want to let me know that you'd like me to unmute you so you can talk directly with Sam and Gwen to ask a question, or alternatively, you can also type your question into the box marked questions and I'll read them out for you. So those are the two ways in which you can ask a question. You can either press raise hand and we'll unmute you, or you can type a question into the box marked questions. And lastly, you can use this little orange arrow to minimize and maximize the toolbar on the right hand side so you can see the slides better. So that's all the housekeeping stuff from me. In a moment, I'm going to hand over to Sam, who's going to give a bit of an overview of the national situation around universal credit. So an update on the status of the rollout and a summary of the changes to UC that were announced just back before Christmas. And then after that, Gwen will talk about her experience of working with universal credit at EMH. So Sam, over to you.
Okay, thanks, David. Yeah, I'm going to run through recent changes to universal credit, a little bit about the rollout in particular the rollout in the East Midlands, and then I'm going to talk through some of the changes in a bit more detail, and then cover one or two other things that are unusual kind of in universal credit and have led to some problems or some misunderstandings. With my slides, some of them I'm just using for kind of like your notes, so to refer back to, so some of them are purely factual. I'm not going to talk through every point, so some of them will just, you know, are there for your reference. Like, for example, when we look at the areas that are being switched over to live, that's, don't really need to add any commentary to those. Okay, so I'll start off. So this is what I'm going to be covering. Recent changes, the full service rollout, the transition to UC, payments, temporary accommodation, the surplus earnings rule, and a little bit about council tax rebates, because that's something that might have been forgotten, which are a little bit different under UC, and it may be a way that you can help your tenants, something that's not been considered very much. Okay, so these are the recent changes that were either being announced. Most of them were announced in the budget, and or some of them subsequently. Hold on a second. Right. Yeah. So the from the 1st of January, there are no new claims in live service areas now. So live service areas are in fact now dead service areas, and you can make claims for legacy benefits in those. The end of the 7-day waiting period, I'm not going to say anything more about that. It just does what it says on the tin, really. Temporary accommodation has gone back into housing benefit, including in UC full service areas. So yeah, that was taken out and put into UC and has gone back into housing benefit. I'll say some more about that. One small change, which I'm not going to cover in detail, but which was announced within the package in there, is the time to report a change, which results in you getting more UC. The time limit is now 14 days, which seems a little bit unfair given that UC has done everything monthly. So you just need to continue to make your tenants aware of the importance of reporting changes on time. And then the surplus earnings rule, which I'll cover. 18 to 21 year olds, you heard that they will requalify again in the full service areas. That's at this stage, that's an announcement only, and they haven't made the legislation yet. So don't rely on it. You have to keep arguing the rules as they've been since the last 12 months. The rollout. Here you can see the original programme for as it was before the budget with the red bars, and it started taking off in, so there were some in October and November and December of last year scheduled, and then really taking off in February, and they've kind of been put back 3 months. But as from this month, it starts again with a vengeance, 40, 50, 60 areas going. This is what happens to your caseload when you go to a full service area. So the very gradual lines are what's happening in live service at the moment. And these are some areas in Somerset and northeast of England in Tyneside. Don't really need to say where UC switched on. It's kind of X marks the spot. You can see the gradient goes up by round about between 7 and 10 times faster than your live service caseload was growing beforehand. These are just the areas in the East Midlands. I'm not going to cover these. You can find the postcode dates in the commencement of orders. If you're in the East Midlands, the main dates where East Midlands ones are going that have been announced officially are those there on the slide. There'll be another commencement order later on in the year, which will deal with September to December, which will give the actual proper fixed dates. Okay, so what's migration and how does it work to UC? So when you switched on to a UC full service area, if you're on a legacy benefit, your legacy benefit continues, and it's not converted until the point of natural migration, and that's where you have a change of circumstances that results in the loss of a legacy benefit. So at that point, let's say you're claiming job seekers allowance and you start working 16 hours a week, that would mean that you would lose your legacy benefit. Nothing else changes, so nobody's forced onto UC, but if you want to continue to get help, then you'll have to do that by claiming UC, and as soon as you claim UC, that switches off all your other legacy benefits. And the other way that you can transfer onto UC in a live service area is if you become a couple with somebody who's already on UC. So loss of a legacy benefit. So these things are all things that all are conditions of entitlement to the benefits that are up there. So to get job seekers allowance, you've got to be fit for work. So if you become unfit for work, you lose your job seekers allowance. Vice versa with the SA. If you're a lone parent and you're on income support, your youngest child reaches 5, you'll lose your income support. So if you need to, if you want to continue to get support, you then at that point have to then claim UC, and then that switches off all your other benefits. The only thing that actually housing benefit ends your HB is if you move out of the local authority area on its own. So if you move within the area, then that doesn't make a change at all. So, and there are a few changes to benefits that don't actually result in migration. Those are the only ones. Those are exceptions, really. And your legacy benefits end the day before your UC starts. And if you're going on to UC because you become a couple, then that date can be retrospective. So because it's lined up with the assessment period of the person who's already on UC. So if your partner moves in with you, then the first day, say if their first day of their assessment period was the first of the month, then it would go all the way back to the first of the month that your benefits would end from. So yeah, that could be before. That will be before the date they've actually moved in. Winners and losers, you can be better off. A good example of that is if you've got a working non-dependent at the moment. Heavy non-dependent charges reduce people's HB either to nothing or to a very small amount. The non-dependent charges in UC are much lower. You can be worse off. As a broad rule of thumb, the people who most likely to lose are lone parents and people with a disability. So there's no equivalent of the severe disability premium or the disability premium in UC, for example. And then some people may lose or gain depending on where they are in the earnings scale. Okay, transitional housing payment. This is a form of housing benefit that was announced in the budget, and it starts from new UC claims from 11th of April going onwards. This works exactly like an HB run-on. If you start back into work, you get housing benefit calculated not based on your income but on the maximum award, regardless of what your income is at that particular time. And because it's a payment of HB, the normal HB payment rules apply unless you're also moving at the same time, including if you're moving within the local authority area, and in which case it goes straight to the tenant rather than to the landlord. Temporary accommodation, they go back now into housing benefit, but it's only for new claims from the 11th of April. Any existing ones continue in UC. Now, if you have a change of circumstance, including a rent increase, which could be as little as 1p, then that will convert those claims over. But if you're the local authority, that's not necessarily a good thing, because the dates, the start dates for HB and UC are different. You might end up with a gap. So it's not necessarily good to kind of convert your claims over. You can get DHP to fill the gap, but then you're running down your HB allocation. So that's not always a good thing to do. There's no fixed rule about what's the best position. It depends on the subsidy rules, and the subsidy rules for HB are based on the January 2011 LHA rates, and in most cases 90% of those. And the other thing is that the HB temporary accommodation rules are based on the actual property size rather than your household size. So you might, depending on what property they're in, the local authority may gain or lose from subsidy if you're trying to convert cases over. So you need to have a look at that a bit more closely. Use the slides for reference. The surplus earnings rule. This came in from April of this year. It mainly applies to self-employed, but it does apply to employed people as well. If there's for any person on UC who's working and earning, there's a threshold at which you will no longer qualify for UC. Your surplus earnings are your earnings in excess of that point. Now, under the surplus earnings rule, if you reclaim UC within 6 months of that, then those surplus earnings can then be counted as income. So it's assumed you've kept that money aside, and that may then disqualify you from UC for the period going forward. So let's just say the point at which you come off UC is when you're earning £500 and you're actually earning 600, then £100 is your surplus earnings, and that's kind of carried forward if you claim again within the next 6 months and take an account of as income. Now, it's only the excess, but there's a de minimis rule, so it's only the excess above £2,500 or more, so that won't count much. Catch out many people this year, but next year it goes to £300, and then it will start to bite, as you'll see with real-time weekly pay. This isn't new to UC, but it's something that was pointed out, one of the consequences of claiming UC. So UC is based on the income that you actually receive within the assessment period. It's not based on your average pay. So if you're paid weekly over the course of the year, there'll be 8 assessment periods with 4 weeks pay in them, and 4 assessment periods with 5 weeks pay in them. So that can create a problem if 5 weeks pay is too high to qualify for UC, and 4 isn't. So that will then mean there's going to be a gap in your UC and you need to reclaim to qualify. So does this mean that because you're only getting UC in, if you fail, even if you reclaim, that you're only getting it in 8 out of 12 months and therefore you're losing out? No, that's not actually what it seems to be. Provided you claim your UC on time again, then you actually get more UC this way than if it was worked out on your monthly average. So that seems a bit counterintuitive. So let's just take you through how that's working. If your average, if UC was based on your average monthly pay and you're being paid weekly, then your average monthly would be 4 1/3 weeks. So that's 50, you know, because over the course of the year, be paid 52 times, and there are 12 months in the year. There's also a threshold where your UC is nil. If 4 weeks pay was equal to that threshold, then you wouldn't get UC anyway. And if over 5 weeks was, then it evens itself out in the course of the year. So in some months you'll get more UC, and in others you'll get less. In between, you would not qualify for UC, but for the fact that it's worked out on a lower amount. So instead of being worked out on your 4 1/3, in some weeks it's actually being worked out on, in some months it's being worked out on 4. So you're getting more UC in those months. And overall, you do the calculations, you can actually show that those people gain rather than lose, and that the actual maximum point of gain is where your average monthly pay, if it was worked out on a monthly average, then was exactly equal to your UC threshold. Now, this is just an example of, kind of way where UC is different. It's not better and it's not worse. It gets rid of some problems in the legacy benefit system. So, for example, one of the problems that's been around for a long time in legacy benefits is that if you are working and earning, it's based on your average pay. And if you then have a bit of overtime, you then find that your housing benefit is recalculated and it gets retrospectively recovered. And quite often people then end up giving up work because, they never quite catch up and they think they're ahead and they end up being behind. So that gets rid of that, but it just creates a different kind of problem. The reclaim is simple because it's online and most of your details will be in there already. So all they'll need to do is go back online and make sure they reclaim in time. That's just a graph which gives an example of how much you're gaining overall. Council tax rebates, I'm just going to cover these in brief. There are different types of council tax rebate. The one that's not known about is discretionary council tax rebate. That's a bit like a DHP, but you don't need council tax rebate in order to get it. So that could wipe out all of your council tax, particularly if you're in difficult circumstances. And the other kinds of main council tax benefit, that's worked out a bit like your old, based on the current HB system and the old council tax benefit. Now, most of the local schemes that councils have adopted are based on the default scheme, and that's, if you claim UC, that's worked out differently and it's actually results in a lot of cases in a higher award than you would have got under the HB related scheme. So just check if you've got people who are in work and getting UC who didn't get a rebate, a council tax rebate before, they might actually qualify under UC. The other thing just to say about discretionary council tax rebate, it can be awarded whether or not you get council tax rebate already, and that decision, even though it's discretionary, can be appealed as well and can be appealed to a valuation tribunal. Your council probably won't like that, but it's well worth checking some of those things. The charts here just give you a rule of thumb to work out how your council tax rebate under the default scheme rules. These will vary from place to place, and it does depend on how much of your council tax is ineligible. And you can see some local variations there of schemes in the East Midlands that I've put up. Okay, if you want to know more, you can find out in our Help with Housing Cost Guide to be published shortly for this year, should be coming out in June. And any questions, but I'll leave that to David. I think we're going to do that at the end after Gwyn.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Sam. Just bear with us 1 second while we switch over to Gwen's presentation. I should say as well that we will share copies of both Sam and Gwen's slides with you all by email afterwards. So particularly with Sam's presentation, where you had some information in the slides that was kind of for reference later, things like dates at which particular job centre areas are due to go onto the full service and things like that. You'll get all of that information by by email afterwards. So with that, Gwen, if you're ready, over to you.
Hi, good afternoon. So yes, I'm going to talk through what our experience has been at EMH Homes. So I'll give you a bit of context. Erewash Local Authority is a full-service universal credit area, and we're soon to be moving Leicester and various areas in Leicester to full service as well. I'll talk to you about how we've managed our arrears and what our performance has been, and then there'll be the opportunity for some questions. So from an EMH Homes perspective, we have around 15,000 units that we manage that are general needs, which does include sheltered properties as well. And we cover around 40 local authority areas. And at the moment, we have 9 local authority areas which are in full service, which makes up around a third of our stock. By the end of June, we will be up to 2/3 of our stock. And of our stock, we do have a mixture of urban and rural populations. So it's a mix from cities to hamlets. The diverse inner city communities tend for us to be Leicester and Northampton. And the more rural areas are the villages around the outskirts of those areas, and right the way up into Derbyshire as well. At the moment, we currently have 931 universal credit claimants. The vast majority of these are actually in the Erewash area because that is our full service area where most of our properties are. But we do have large numbers in other full service areas. Overall, in terms of our stock profile, around 56% of our residents historically have been claiming some sort of benefit, whether that's housing benefit in full or partial. And obviously we're now starting to see that transition around universal credit too. And as I mentioned, 2/3 of our stock will move into full universal credit full service areas by the end of June this year. Arrears prior to 1/3 of our stock going into universal credit full service were 2.1%. And since then, so in April of this year, our arrears are now 2.86%. So we have seen an increase overall in the amount of debt that we have outstanding as a result of universal credit. So in relation to Erewash, they moved on to full service almost exactly a year ago. They went live around the 11th of May last year. And in the Erewash area, we have around 5,200 properties. And of those properties, 3,282 of them are working age and therefore could be affected by full service should they need to make a claim. As I've already said, we've got 931 claimants, and 639 of those do actually live in the Erewash area, and that's around 70%. Arrears have increased by around £200,000 in that last year. What we have started to see now, though, is that increase is plateauing. So we are not getting this continual spike that it was. It's plateaued out, and we're hopeful that in that particular area we will start to see the arrears coming down again. We have requested around 247 alternative payment arrangements due to rent arrears in excess of 8 weeks, and that's around 28% of our universal credit claimants. And our universal credit arrears, which includes arrears prior to their universal credit claim, are currently around 9.66%. So when you compare that to the 2.86% that I've mentioned previously, which is all residents, regardless of whatever benefit they're on, you can see that universal credit arrears are quite a lot higher. In the Erewash area, we have gone into a partnership to joint fund the personal budgeting service on a full-time basis. And that particular team member has supported over 400 residents during the last 12 months to actually claim relevant benefits and make sure that their universal credit is paid on time, etc. And that has resulted in around £131,000 worth of customer gains for those residents that have been supported over the last 12 months. And the other thing just to note in relation to our experience at Erewash was that prior to December, we didn't have the landlord portal. So since we've had the landlord portal, in some ways it's easier because we can see when a new claim has been made and we can apply for an APA via the portal. But prior to that, we were having to go through the service centre continually in order to get that information, which has its own difficulties around implicit consent. So some of the challenges that we've had with our experience at Erewash. Obviously, the explicit consent is an issue, and it can be particularly difficult when we're dealing with complex cases. The DWP complex needs plans, we've found that they're not as comprehensive as they could be, and the DWP aren't always that keen to share that information with us so that we can actually support residents in the most effective way. We've had limited support from the DWP when we've actually come to desperately trying to prevent homelessness. And personal budgeting support is not mandatory. So we have around 25% non-attendance rate of our personal budgeting support appointments. One of the problems that lots of areas are finding is that tenants are spending that first payment of housing costs, despite numerous contacts with them to remind them that they need to pay that direct over to us. And managing the landlord portal has started to become very much a full-time job. I am aware of a recent announcement that the actual rent variation process in April will not now require every claimant to register the fact that they've had a rent variation, and for that to then come through the portal and be verified by the landlord. Apparently, there will just be a sample of those that will come through to the landlord, and it'll be based on a tolerance amount of how much the housing costs have increased by, which is positive, and will help to reduce the amount of work that's actually done in the landlord portal. So despite all of the challenges that we have had, one of the positives that we can say is that we've actually reduced the number of tenants in the Erewash area where warrants have been requested, and the number of evictions that have been completed last year have also reduced, which is really positive. Case management of universal credit cases is done on all patches throughout that particular area, so all staff in that area do have access to universal credit cases. It's not done specifically by set officers. And our housing management system supports with recording and reporting of cases where our residents are in receipt of universal credit. Obviously, I've talked about the fact that we joint fund a personal budgeting service, which does mean that we're actually able to prioritise our cases. We do get some cases through which are from other landlords. Obviously, they still get the support that they need, but being the major landlord in that area, we've got the lion's share of those particular ones. So we can sort of say that, well, we know that this is a social housing tenant and therefore needs to be prioritised. We're having regular meetings with our partners to be able to understand the challenges from all sides. And we're also creating a local hub in one of the town centres as an organisation, which will have a separate digital area where our residents can use the equipment and the Wi-Fi access to be able to make their claims online for universal credit. There are lots of ongoing communications via social media and our website, and obviously we also use more traditional methods via posters and leaflets as well. the landlord portal does support us with new claims, as I've already said, and also requesting alternative payment arrangements where we feel that that's appropriate. And obviously, because we've got our housing management system supports the recording and reporting of that, we're able to put that into there so that we know exactly where we are with casework. In relation to Leicester, Leicester City and quite a large area of the Leicester County actually moved to full service in June, and that's around June the 13th. Obviously, Leicester is quite a diverse area. There's over 70 languages spoken in Leicester, but Leicester does cover the city and rural locations as well. So it is a mixture of urban and deprived areas and also rural affluent areas. Our stock profile is that we have around 1,135 working age residents that live within the Leicester City area, plus around 1,200 residents that live in the Blaby and Oadby areas. We've been having joint meetings with professionals in the sector regarding the switch over to full service in order to share best practice. And there's lots of city-based preparation going on, and we will be accessing their services that they've been making available. We're going to be doing new communications are currently being developed using the same platforms that we've already described, so social media and our website, along with more traditional communication methods. We do work in partnership with Leicestershire Citizens Advice, where we actually fund a part-time post to provide support around benefit and financial difficulties to residents that we're aware of that need that support. I'm aware that there is a further launch meeting with partners on the 17th of May, which will be used to share details on the support services that will be available locally. Obviously, some of that is still in preparation. So that launch meeting will be able to make all landlords, social or private, aware that there are services available in the city that they can access. And recently, a number of social providers have actually been able to access the Derby DWP Service Centre to go and have a look around there and have conversations with staff that work there and the managers, which has proved really useful. One, to put faces to names, but also two, to understand some of the challenges from their perspective as well. We've recently delivered some additional training via the DWP to around 70 members of our team around full service. And we've also been visiting local Job Centre Plus areas at sites so that we can build relations at those local sites, which ultimately helps us to support residents when we have complex case management. In terms of EMH Homes arrears management, we've done quite a bit around our preparation there. So we've reviewed our pre-tenancy risk assessment and built universal credit into that to ensure that residents are actually able to afford a tenancy before they take that on. And there are also discussions as part of the pre-tenancy and sign-up process, which explain when universal credit may need to be claimed and how that would work for that particular person. We've also reviewed our income collection procedures, which include the use of the landlord portal from an internal perspective. And we're currently in the process of reviewing our income collection policy. We massively promote rent in advance with our residents, asking residents at the beginning of their tenancy to pay a month in advance if they possibly can. If that's not possible, then we will make an arrangement with them to try and get them to a position where they are a month in advance. If they do at any point in the future need to claim universal credit, which will mean that their housing costs are paid monthly in arrears. We've significantly increased our direct debit take-up, and we also work in partnership with AllPay on a service which is called reoccurring debit card payments, which enables us to set up a debit card payment and then for that payment to be taken every week or every month thereafter until there's a change to the value that needs to be collected, both of which are working very well. We're doing a lot of promotion from a financial inclusion perspective. As I've already said, we cover 40 local authority areas. And while we do have the personal budgeting advice service in Erewash, which is the money advice element there, we also have 2 financial inclusion officers which cover the other local authority areas. So for us, promoting financial inclusion and money advice is really important to our residents, so they understand what they can claim and what the eligibility of that is. We've also been reviewing our service level agreements with Citizens Advice to make sure that we're getting a really good return on investment, because obviously we're funding posts with them to make sure that that they're providing support to residents. And we need to make sure that that support is maximised as much as possible. Internally, we have done a mini restructure, which has been a cost-neutral process. And this was done to create more resources to manage low-level debt, because from a universal credit perspective, residents go into 5 to 6 weeks rent arrears before a payment comes through, which is increasing the workload in that particular sort of bracket. And we've also done quite a bit of telephone rent arrears training to make sure that our staff are fully au fait with what they need to be saying on the phone when they're having conversations with residents. In terms of performance, so in April 2017, our rent arrears were 2.61%. In April of this year, as you can see, they've increased to 2.93%. Now you'll see that that percentage there is slightly higher than the percentage I've quoted earlier on in the presentation. The reason for that is because I'm giving you an April to April like-for-like figures. The 2.86% is actually the latest performance as it stands today, but as at April we were 2.93. In terms of universal credit arrears in April, and apologies for the typing error there, the universal credit arrears were 12.74%, and in April of this year we've significantly reduced those down to 10.90%, which is positive. Universal credit claimants in April of last year, we only had 140. However, now we've got 893 as of April this year. It's now over 900. In terms of the evictions that we completed in the previous financial year to last year, so in 2016-17, we completed 50 evictions, and then in the last financial year we managed to reduce that down to 42. So again, a significant reduction, meaning that management costs of actually managing arrears on those cases have reduced. We talked about getting tenants to pay rent in advance, and in April 2017 we had around 1.2 million rent in advance at that point. By April this year we managed to increase that to 2.3 million, demonstrating that our rent in advance approach is significantly working. And around financial inclusion gains, in 2016-17, our financial inclusion officers supported residents to access £780,000 worth of additional benefits. However, in 2017-18, they significantly managed to increase that to around 1.2 million. So we have some questions, and I'm going to go to the CIH organisers to just sort of ask how we pull these poll questions through.
Yeah, thank you, Gwen. That was great. So in a moment, we'll take some questions for you and Sam. But first, we've just got a couple of questions for audience members. So this one should be popping up on your screen now, the first question, which is about the arrears targets that people have set for the coming year. So have you set your arrears targets based on continuing to improve your performance in terms of rent collection in spite of universal credit? So I guess the question that we're asking here is how realistic or challenging are people being when setting their targets? I'll just give people another moment. I can see most people have voted. Okay. So that's interesting. So a bit of a split down the middle, but just over half still expecting to improve existing performance, which I think is interesting. Chris, can we move on to the next question? So does your organisation have in-house tenancy support? So I guess when we say tenancy support, we're talking about personal budgeting, financial inclusion, that kind of thing.
But also other forms of tenancy support where it will support residents to access local amenities and services as well.
Okay, thank you. So, yep, absolutely everyone has in-house tenancy support. So next question, are you rethinking your service delivery as a result of universal credit? Okay, thank you. That is another landslide for yes. Almost everyone thinking about making changes to their services in preparation for the full UC service. And finally, for those of you who are making changes, what is the nature of those changes? I think you can only select one of these. It may be that you're doing more than one, but you'll have to choose the one that you feel is most appropriate. Okay, thank you. So a little bit of people moving between specialist and generic services, but the majority increasing their investment in tenancy support. So I think as a sort of snapshot of what people are doing to respond, that's really useful. I think perhaps mostly those results were what we might have expected, more people investing in tenancy support, most people rethinking their services. Perhaps the one I found most interesting was what targets people are setting themselves, and that there's still 55% of organizations who are expecting to improve their income collection performance in spite of universal credit, which is very ambitious. I don't know whether Gwen or Sam, whether you have any thoughts on any of that.
Yes, it is interesting. Certainly, the performance targets that we've adopted at EMH are still incredibly challenging, albeit that our performance target has increased by 0.01%. It's still going to be very, very difficult for us to actually reach that.
Yeah, okay. Shall we take some questions from the audience now then? So just a reminder that there's two ways that you can ask a question to Sam and to Gwen. You can either press the raise hand button on the right hand side of your screen. If you are listening to me through a telephone or a headset that's got a microphone attached and you can speak directly to them, you can do that. Or you can type a question into the box that's marked questions and I'll read it out for you. So first question we've had come in is a nice easy one. So this is from Chantel and she's asking, Gwen, could you let us know where the Leicester launch event is due to be held, please?
Off the top of my head, no, but I could potentially email it through to CIH, and then if CIH want to email that on to the recipients of the webinar.
That would be brilliant. We're intending obviously to circulate slides and the recording and things afterwards, so we could circulate details along with that. The other thing that I was going to mention is that this webinar is one of a short series that we're doing. We're running another webinar on Universal Credit in the East Midlands next week, and that webinar is focusing more on Leicester and their preparations for gearing up for full service. We've got a speaker from the council then, I think. So people may want to join us again next week for a little bit more detail about that. So I've got a couple more questions that started to come in now. So one from Anna, who's asking, how have you tried to tackle the issue about non-attendance for personal budgeting support?
So we are working in partnership with the local job centre pluses. So we will talk to the work coaches to say, we've got Mrs. Smith, she's down for personal budgeting support interview in a couple of days. Please can you send them a reminder via their work journal that they need to attend. So and that's very much a localised arrangement between us and the local job centre and the work coaches that are there, because it is down to the work coaches to put those messages into claimants' journals. We can also have conversations. So, for example, I will ring up the local job centre and have a conversation with the manager if there's a complex needs case where we're struggling around personal budgeting support, to get that person to engage, to see whether there's anything else that we can potentially do. And we have put multiple messages into journals to try and get people to engage with us, so that either our personal budgeting support person or the job centre can try and have a conversation about their housing costs and the potential financial difficulties they may be in.
Great, thank you. And the next question is from Martin, who's asking, how have you met the challenge of providing IT provision in rural areas?
That's a really difficult one. Obviously, it does fall to the resident to take that personal responsibility around claiming universal credit and claiming online. However, our housing team do have remote devices, so personal tablets that they can take out. So if we're aware that we have a resident that is struggling to either, one, access relevant IT equipment, or two, have no access to the internet, then we can send somebody out to help them make their online claim via their tablet. So we can do that, but that hasn't been a major issue for us as it stood so far. But obviously, as more areas move across, and we have difficulties with some areas not having great internet speed or access to the internet, then that could potentially pose an issue.
Great, thank you. And one more from Mohammed, who says, you've done well to control the number of evictions. What measures would you put that down to?
Persistence, dedication. Unfortunately, there is no magic formula around this. It is very much a case of dealing with every single case on a case-by-case basis, working incredibly hard to get that resident to engage, working with relevant partners or support agencies that they may be working with as well, to try and make sure that we've dotted all the I's and we've crossed all the T's, and we really do consider eviction to be our last resort. 2 years ago, our eviction numbers were 72 and we're now down to 42. So that's a significant reduction in a very short space of time. And it is because of the amount of work that we will put in to try and prevent that from happening.
And Sam, I've got a question for you now. This one's coming from Martin, who's saying, are you expecting any further government policy announcements on UC?
Not that we know of.
Sorry. Oh, sorry, Sam, go ahead. You were muted before. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, not that we know of, no, but it's almost inevitable that there will be changes over time as kind of new problems emerge. I mean, if you think about the legacy benefit system, that was never stable. There are always changes made pretty much every year, not just the kind of the annual uprating. So I think as more of these kinds of issues get raised, then over time, UC won't be a sort of like a rigid system. It will change, but what those changes will be, will be driven by what the problems are. There don't seem to have been, although we haven't got into the heavy part of the full service rollout, that's just starting this month, but there haven't been the kinds of issues which were being raised in October, November and December of last year before the budget, when people were really getting into a mess and waiting for those 6 months. So some of these fixes that governments have put forward and are now in place look as if they'll, kind of may well have dealt with the main issues. One thing that isn't potentially fixed and is, kind of, because some of these things are temporary. So the temporary accommodation thing is a temporary fix. It's just kind of being put into the too difficult box. Also, the transition to UC payments, they don't deal with the issue about the wait that people will have when everything's UC. So, and there are no more legacy benefits cases left. So, there might be a change around that. So we might need to reissue that again. But no, we won't. It will be. You can expect it to be a constantly changing service, but not as heavy each year as the past few years have been.
Thank you, Sam. Just on that as well, I'm wondering whether is it worth just saying something about which changes we would ideally like to see. So we obviously have a bit of a dialogue ongoing with DWP and with ministers. We had pushed quite hard for things like the 7-day waiting period to be removed before, and I think that and the other changes that were announced before Christmas have certainly improved things, but there are still things that we would like ideally to see changed and improved. I wonder, Sam, could you just say a little bit about what ideally we would like to see next?
Well, the wait is still an issue. So the 6-week wait effectively has been reduced to a 5-week wait with the end of the 7-day waiting period. You could call that a 3-week wait if you take into account the transition payments now which have been available from April. There will still be as I said just a few seconds ago, there will still be a problem for people when we get to steady state, i.e. when there aren't any legacy benefits claims left anymore for people finishing work. Potentially, if they're on a low income, then it might not be as bad because they might be getting in work UC already. But the people, kind of those people who haven't got any kind of sort of backup but don't get any UC at the moment, there are changes that could be made, I think, that would improve that. One of the things that could be looked at is actually just changing the first assessment period to a shorter period, and that would then mean that people wouldn't have the long wait, and they wouldn't have to apply for an advance payment, a loan, which effectively just spreads out the pain over a longer period, and that could work quite well because it would also give landlords kind of a warning. So you get your short assessment period, and so that warning would come up fairly early on, and then you'd get into the monthly ones after that. So that's something that we're exploring that might work. The other thing that might possibly work as well is you could pro rata changes within the assessment period. So at the moment, your change goes right back to the start of the assessment period, even if the change occurred in the middle, and you get an award of benefit based on as if that change had happened before it actually did, if that makes sense. If you prorated them, then the change would occur. You'd still get your monthly lump, but you'd have a before and after, and that would probably make a little bit more sense to people, and it wouldn't be difficult to do because it's just it's purely a mathematical calculation. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at the moment.
Great, thank you. And just one more question from me, if that's okay. This one's for Gwen. Gwen, I'm just conscious that there will be most organisations don't have the landlord portal. It's not been fully rolled out yet, and so I'm conscious there'll be a lot of people listening to this who are still relying on, secure emails back and forth with DWP all the time, and whose ears will probably have pricked up at the mention of it. Could you just maybe say a little bit about what the landlord portal is and what it enables you to do differently compared to the system you were working under before, please?
Yeah, so when you do finally get access to the landlord portal, you basically get access to a secure web address, and you can then set all your staff up to be able to view that secure web page, and manage their settings as well. So once you've got access to that, it looks very similar to the Universal Credit Journal for anyone that's actually making a claim. So when you log in, you get a to-do list, and in that to-do list, you will have basically rent verification to-dos. So when a new claimant claims Universal Credit, it will send you a notification to say Mrs. Smith at High Street has made a claim for Universal Credit. You'll click on it, and then you'll need to verify what the housing costs are associated with that claim, which will include any service charges as well. As part of the initial setup for that access, you will be asked to load a copy of your property profile, so a list of all your properties with their address and their postcode, and that's how the landlord portal actually works. So once you've loaded all your property data into the system, if someone makes a claim for Universal Credit, one of the key identifying factors around that is where the resident lives, their postcode. So the DWP system will match postcodes of the claimant to, are there any social landlords with that postcode registered in their property portfolio? And if that's the case, then it will send you a request to verify that person's rent and double check that the person that's making the Universal Credit claim is the tenant. We've had quite a few notifications that come through where maybe it's another household member that's making a claim for Universal Credit and not necessarily the tenant. So you have to deal with those particular ones slightly differently. As part of the portal setup, we were invited to a session with the DWP back in January to consider what went well with the setup and what could potentially be developed in the future. And myself and a number of other social housing providers attended, and we gave a huge list of things that we felt that the portal could do because at the moment it is very limited. It is just verifying housing costs and applying for alternative payment arrangements, when actually it could do a multitude of things. So the DWP have taken that information away and are potentially looking at whether they want to build that into their existing policy and therefore develop it within their systems.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Gwen. I think that's about all that we've got time for. So huge thank you to both to Sam and to Gwen and to everyone for all of your questions. I really hope you found this useful. Just before we wrap up, the other thing I should just remind everyone of is that we are running another webinar on Universal Credit in the East Midlands next week. It's on Thursday again, but in the morning at 11 o'clock, and we'll be talking a bit more about Leicester and their preparations for full service, which Gwen already mentioned, and there'll be someone from DWP who will be part of that as well. So I'm sure lots of you may have questions and things that you'd like to put to them. So if you're able to join us for that and you're not already registered, please do. Again, if you're a CIH member, it's free. So we'd obviously love to have some of you on the line for that again. So huge thanks, everyone. I really hope you found this useful, and I'm going to leave that there now. So bye, everybody.
Bye.